I prefer self.
I'm going to take a slight bit of history here. So actually, formerly with the associated with the Northern Virginia Conservation Trust. And this is kind of a historic visit for me, because 30 years ago, the airport authority, because they needed to expand the runway, and delivered that plan, fill in for the land for 70 acres. If there's a blue herring on Crow's Nest. And thanks to Paul Noe, we've out preserved Crow's Nest. So thank you. Thank you. Good to see that.
Tommy Blackwell, former Commissioner of Revenue in Essex County and friend of the Rappahannock.
Jillian Falstaff, RRBC.
And we have a number of members online. Would you like to? Julian, will you call folks out since you can read the names? You're sitting right there at the computer. And they can introduce themselves.
Can the folks online hear us clearly? All right, go ahead, Nancy Long. Party out.
Madison County Board of Supervisors.
Brian Nickel, Orange County Supervisors.
Debbie Donahue.
Good afternoon. I'm a supervisor in Rappahannock County.
Lori Blanc.
Hi, I'm Lori Blanc with Revere Nonprofit Organization in Fredericksburg, Virginia.
Michelle Edwards.
Hello, Michelle Edwards with the Rappahannock Rapidan Regional Commission. Thank you.
Delegate Hillary Kent.
Yes, hi, Hillary Kent, delegate for District 67, which is the Northern Neck in Caroline. So glad to be here via Zoom. Thank you.
John Basin.
John Bateman, Lancaster County staff.
James Mannix.
Hi, my name is James Mannix. I'm here on behalf of Senator Bryce Reeves, representative of Virginia's 28th Senatorial District.
Harrison Kremen.
Good morning, afternoon actually. Harrison Kremen with Culpeper County Planning and Zoning.
Delegate Higgins. Moving on there, Luke Peters.
Luke Peters with the Berkeley Group.
Norm Goulet, I'm sorry if I'm pronouncing the last name.
Norm Goulet, staff, Northern Virginia Regional Commission.
Kevin Utt.
Yes, good afternoon, Kevin Utt. I'm with A.M. Morton Thomas Consulting Engineers. I'm a formal Rappahannock River Basin Commission technical staff member. Thank you, everybody.
Tanner Herschel. Tanner says the mic is not cooperating, but is chief of staff for Delegate Higgins. James Martin. And if James is not there, we also have a phone number. I'm not sure if that person is. Go ahead.
Thank you, Jillian. Mr. Chairman, Delegate Higgins is in his car on 95, stuck in all that traffic. He is on his way here, so he will be here in person shortly. Depending on what 95 is. Yeah. You never can know.
Got everybody online?
Yep.
Thank you and welcome, Senator. Welcome.
Thank you.
Review and approval of agenda. I move for approval of the agenda. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Next up is the election of vice chair, and executive committee. Turn it over to Eldon.
Thank you. We're gonna open the floor for nominations for chair and then we'll point over to the elected chair. We will proceed with the rest of it. Any nominations?
Nominate Jason Bellow. Second.
All right. Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. All in favor of Jason Bellows as one more year as chair? So please say aye.
Aye. Well, thank you for the comments.
Wait a minute. Thank you very much. The gavel is now
I
yours.
guess it's back to me again. So we need to elect a vice chair and that person needs to come from the General Assembly. So if y'all would like to,
And just to clarify, state code requires that if a member of local government is the chair, the vice chair must be a member of the assembly and vice versa. So that was the reason for must be a member, and we have 3 members of the General Assembly. And virtually, and we got some in abstention if you want to.
You want to do it? If you want to nominate. I mean, it's my first meeting, so you probably don't want. So make a nomination, dude. All right, I nominate you.
any other nominations? We'll close the nominations. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations. I'll make sure I can skip a few meetings so you can. Oh, great. Still there. Yeah. Moving on to the next important business is the fiscal agency.
Well, we got to do the rest of the executive.
Skip that.
You know, if you remember, last year, we tried to skip it, and we ended up doing it at the end of the meeting. But that was because, we had, Director Rollman with us, and he was on a tight time schedule, so we flipped the agenda, elected the chair, and then proceeded with hearing from, Director Rollman. You guys aren't getting the same courtesy.
Who are our current, executive?
Okay, and what happens is, the executive committee, by our bylaws, exists in case any action needs to be taken between a commission meeting and the executive committee can meet to do that. And primarily that deals with grant applications. The bylaws state that staff cannot apply for any non-appropriated funds. That means coming from the localities or the General Assembly without express approval of the commission. And so if some unique grant opportunity came available in the commission meetings, the executive committee could be called, authorize the application to be reaffirmed at the commission meeting. We haven't had to do that for over a decade, so anybody elected to the executive committee probably doesn't have to worry about a meeting unless we have something very urgent. This past year, Delegate Guzman was the representative for the Upper Basin. Kevin Marshall was representative for the Middle Basin, and Ronnie Gill from Essex, who's not with us, able to be with us today, was representative for the Lower Basin.
Do you wish to continue to serve in that capacity?
Yeah, I'm fine with it.
Do we have somebody from the Upper Basin who would be willing to serve in that capacity if needed? The tough job, so I mean, long time before.
Once before, I guess I go back over it again.
And since Ronnie's not here, we'll just put him on there by default.
That'll teach you.
All those in favor of those members serving on the executive committee, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations. Okay, now we'll appoint a fiscal agent.
Yes, sir. Mr. Chairman, the code requires that the organizational meeting each year, the River Basin Commission designate a fiscal agent. The commission has designated GWRC, and then before GWRC, its predecessor Radco, as the fiscal agent since the commission came into existence in 1998. And Chip Boyles is here and has told me they're happy to continue to serve. So,
Well, they've done a great job, so.
we'll always get good reports from the Auditor of Public Accounts every year.
All those in favor of the George Washington Commission continuing as the fiscal agent, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Congratulations. Big bucks.
Yeah.
Next up, approval of the consent agenda. Any questions about the consent agenda? Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you. Next up is public comment. Is there anybody in the room who'd like to make public comment? Since we don't have a podium, you can just stand wherever you want.
Stand right here, if that's okay, against the wall. If anyone wants to throw darts, feel free. My name is Brent Hunsinger. I am Director of Advocacy and Coastal Programs with Friends of Rappahannock. Don't worry, I'm not here to talk about one particular issue today. Ellen and I had discussed maybe giving you all a little bit of an update on who FOR is, because we do have a fair amount of new elected officials. So if you're not familiar with FOR, you'll learn a lot. If you are familiar, you'll probably still learn a lot. I learned a lot today. So he gave me about 5 minutes, if so, I will indulge and get that done. I also would like to introduce Angela Nam. She is our literally brand new green infrastructure coordinator, which means she will be handling a lot of our VCAP work that we had with some of the soil and water conservation districts, as well as a lot of other things. So basically, it's a lot of your green infrastructure. If you don't know what that is, it means a lot of the projects that we do to infiltrate stormwater in urban and suburban areas and rural areas as well, but mostly in those areas with lots of impervious surfaces. So thank you and welcome. FOR was founded in 1985. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization, membership driven. Our mission is to be a voice and active force for a healthy and scenic Rappahannock River. We do have 3 offices now, Culpeper, Fredericksburg, and Rappahannock. We operate in all 18 localities in the watershed. Our 3 pillars, education, restoration, and advocacy. Believe it or not, we are above 30 employees now, including full-time and part-time. We have never been as large as we are now. That said, obviously, there's never been as much funding available as we have had recently. Education, we operate in all schools, not all the schools, but at least in some of the schools in all 18 localities, through summer camps, meaningful watershed educational experiences and field trips. And in 2023, actually, these are hot off the press numbers. Our 2023 annual report is about to be released pretty soon. So we reached 11,000 students in 2023. Restoration, over 40,000 in 2023, over 40,000 plus trees planted, over 4,600 pounds of litter removed. That number's a little bit lower last year. We've done more in the past. It just kind of goes with where our money and our staff support can go to. 1 million oysters planted, so that some of our other resources are going toward oyster restoration. We are hoping in July of this year to have a 6 to 10 acre reef restored off of Belle Isle State Park. So stay tuned for that. Pretty exciting. We're working with a lot of partners on that. And state parks are very pleased with that. Love to put you on that boat out. Yeah, I love to do it. All right, good. We just bought a brand new boat too. Thousands of square feet of shoreline planted. So living shorelines. I know with Delegate Kent, we've had a lot of discussions about living shorelines. We're looking forward to applying for some money to bring more technical assistance and cost share money, hopefully, to the lower part of the watershed here soon. But that would have to get approved first as well. We obviously, so FOR we work by, with, and through our partners. Many of those partners being soil and water conservation districts, the planning district commissions, other NGOs, businesses, local and state government agencies, and the Rappahannock tribes, the Rappahannock tribe, as well as you all, the elected officials. Advocacy. So we do put a lot of time into local advocacy. You will not see us all the time in every county all the time, but we do, as much as possible, spend a lot of our time working with the planning commissions, local staff, and board of supervisors. Some of that has to do with where we are and what issues are going on at any one time. State advocacy, many of you know at the General Assembly, we work with our VCN partners, and then at the federal level with our Choose Clean Water Coalition partners. Some of the recent issues that you have probably heard FOR talk about, if you do not know, they have to do with land use, and siting regarding data centers, utility scale solar projects. Water supply planning is a big one that we are very concerned about and working on with many of you all. Fisheries issues, environmental literacy funding, and living shoreline funding. We are also working a lot on septic and living shoreline outreach, as well as budget funding across the board. And then not to be forgotten, retaining and replacing tree canopy in the watershed, especially in our dense urban areas. And then finally, if you all, a couple of things coming up, our annual meeting will be in Fredericksburg on May 16th. Upriver, we have a member meeting at Mountain Run Winery on May 9th. And then on May 22nd at Refuel Irvington, we are holding another meeting there. We would love, these are all in the evenings. We would love to see you all in your appropriate work. If you're from the mountains, you want to come down and see how we do things in the Tidal region, come on down and do that and vice versa. And then just so you know, some of you all enjoyed Riverfest. September 21st is when Riverfest, our major fundraiser, is happening. That's always a big party, and we always say, come if you want the scene, but if you don't like the scene, then you probably don't want to be there. All you can crafts, barbecue, and open bar. If you give me 1 or 2 minutes, I will introduce the Rappahannock River Roundtable. So the Roundtable is a strategic partnership of stakeholders dedicated to land and water conservation, community outreach and education, and capacity building through the Rappahannock watershed. Brian Hoffman, my boss, our deputy director, is the coordinator of the roundtable, but the roundtable is made up of many of you all as well. And so it is a does not do advocacy. It is all about spreading the word about different things such as cost share and technical assistance, grant programs and funding opportunities, water quality information, Rappahannock River water trails, land conservation, and those issues which are on the website. We do have a steering committee to give an example of the depth and breadth of some of the folks that sit on that steering committee, and this is just now, there's been others in the past. The Northern Neck Water Conservation District, GWRC, Elvin James is on that steering committee, DOF, Fish and Wildlife Service, Farmland Trust, DWR, the Northern Neck Land Conservancy, the Cooperative Extension, SEAS, NBCT, the Virginia Association of Soil Water Conservation Districts, and Wetlands Watch, as well as the Rapidan and Rappahannock River Basin Commission, to not forget anyone. Also, some of the services that the roundtable offers are direct project support services, grant writing services, outreach and education, support services, GIS, support services, and digital comms services as well. And research support services. Finally, a couple more things. We always have every year something called the Rappahannock River Symposium. Raise your hand if you've been there or heard of it before. So I would hope that you all can advocate for that, or you can really know that this is a symposium we put on in October of every year. It's a gathering of minds for the Rappahannock watershed to learn about the latest in science and issues affecting the Rappahannock River and its watershed. Finally, we're proud to announce that in the next week, $2.3 million of investment from federal funders in the Rappahannock watershed through grants to 5+ organizations will be announced to advance many of the priorities that you all are going to hear from many of the great folks who are speaking today. So we can't name what they are yet, but just know in the next week, you're going to see a lot of announcement about great funding coming into the watershed. So appreciate you all allowing me to speak, and looking forward to learning from you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else in the room would like to make public comment?
Not 5 minutes. Chip Boyles, George Washington Regional Commission, and just number one, thank you for entrusting us with your fiscal matters and the enormous budget of the RRBC. We try to do our best job. But to invite everyone in partnership with the Chesapeake Bay Trust, the George Washington Regional Commission is hosting a green infrastructure charrette. We'd love to have you all participate. It is April 12th April 26th at noon. Information is on our website, but it's a combination of an educational charrette, as well as 3 specific projects, Stafford, Spotsylvania, and King George County are looking to implement. And these will be kind of pre-designed conceptual type of work going on at this charrette. It'll be held at a library in Stafford County. So we'd love to have you all there April 26th, and information's on our website. So thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Anyone else in the room like to make comment? Anybody online like to make comment?
April 26th.
Anybody online? So, seeing none, we will close the public comment and we'll move on to our first presentation. The Chesapeake Bay Commission and Executive Director.
Whatever you're comfortable with, since we don't have a podium, you can stand down there. We're gonna have your presentation on that screen.
That might be best, if
Okay.
you're looking back and forth the whole time.
Whiplash, sure.
All right. Thank you for having us today. I am Anna Killius. I'm the Executive Director of the Chesapeake Bay Commission. I've been in that role for a little over a year. But before that, I'm based in Annapolis right now, but before that, I was actually down here in Virginia. Not here in this river basin, but working on state policy on behalf of the James River and its watershed. So not unfamiliar to the Commonwealth, but have taken my talents north, still on behalf of a bigger watershed that includes the ones that I have called home. I'm going to turn it over to Adrienne really quickly to introduce herself.
Hi, everybody. I'm the Virginia Director for the Chesapeake Bay Commission. So Anna's going to give you kind of the broad overview and our watershed-wide work, and then I'll hop up there and tell you about our Virginia-specific efforts.
And we have state directors in all 3 of our states. So we have one in Harrisburg and one that's with me in Annapolis as well. And it's just counter down. Thank you.
And members have hard copies of the presentation follow.
Which is great, because some of these words are gonna be a little small.
And of course.
And you're actually pointing it at that computer. Not quite.
Make you nervous for getting on the plane over there, huh?
This must be operated by Boeing.
Sorry. So just to kind of ground ourselves in the watershed, a lot of attention right now is obviously for good reason on the deep water shipping channel in our estuary. But if there's one thing to know about the Chesapeake Bay, it is that it is very shallow. The average depth of our bay is 21 feet. And that's important because it allows for a lot of the habitats and the living resources that we rely on as part of our culture and as part of our economic vitality to flourish in this area. That includes blue crabs, oysters, juvenile fish, underwater grasses. However, that shallowness is also at times a detriment. 64,000 square miles of land flow into our water body, 14 times greater than the amount of the area of the water that they're flowing into. And that means that compared to other estuaries, we are very shallow. And that runoff coming off that land, entering the waterway, is more than our waterway is able to handle. That pollution that is coming off is harming our watershed. So just to give you a sense of all the folks that have to work together to pay attention to what's coming off our land, what we're doing with our land. It is 6 states, the District of Columbia, that all need to be paying attention, working collaboratively to understand that impact in order to protect our waters and manage the resources that we need from those waters. I guess not working, we just tell them again. Next slide, great. So in that spirit, the Chesapeake Bay Commission was created. We are established by state law in 3 states, Maryland, Virginia, and Pennsylvania. We were created in the 1980s to serve a couple of different purposes. First, we help those general assemblies to evaluate issues of common concern when it comes to the bay and its watershed. We promote intergovernmental cooperation and coordination where that's appropriate, but we also understand that in each of those states, sometimes the different TAC is needed and we create space for that to happen. We coordinate our regional interests and our regional policy proposals up to Congress. We serve a bit of a unique role in that fashion. We are not recipients of any federal funding. We just speak to Congress about how they can best appropriate those federal funds to go into the work that's happening within our region, and really going into the work that our partners are doing. And finally, we are a signatory to the Chesapeake Bay Agreement and a full partner within the Chesapeake Bay Program. We have 21 members as part of our commission, 7 from each of those states. Primarily, those members are state legislators, but Adrienne will touch a little bit more on Virginia and Virginia's complement in a moment. But we are bipartisan, we are collaborative, and in some ways we are competitive. Our members like to keep track of what their colleagues in the other states are doing, because they're liable to steal their ideas and bring them back to their states to put into practice, and they think those are good ideas, which is truly a value of the commission. Something that we are able to put into our work when we're communicating with Congress, because we are bipartisan. We are talking to our delegation in Congress, and from that perspective of bringing them really common sense solutions that will work for our region. Next slide. So, as I said, we are full partners and signatories of the Chesapeake Bay Program. We are celebrating 40 years of partnership within that program this past year. Originally, in 1983, when the first Chesapeake Bay Agreement was signed, these were your signatories: Virginia, Maryland, Pennsylvania, the District of Columbia, EPA on behalf of the federal agencies that work together in this work, and us, the Chesapeake Bay Commission, our chair, signed that agreement. Now, we have 3 more. We've welcomed in the rest of our headwater states: Delaware, West Virginia, and New York. We are on our 4th agreement that was signed in 2014. It's the Chesapeake Bay Watershed Agreement. And we are, as a program, as a partnership, working towards the elements of that agreement. So in a nutshell, this is what that agreement encapsulates. We have one vision for all of those partners to work towards. That one vision sets us up to collaborate on 10 goals represented here. They really stretch from everything from water quality, environmental literacy, public access, and sustainable fisheries. It really kind of takes a comprehensive look at what a healthy bay and watershed provides for the people of our region, and how do we make sure that it is able to provide those resources. Amongst those 10 goals, there are 31 outcomes. So for each of those goals, there's between 1 and 5 time-bound measurable targets, generally measurable targets, that we use to assess our progress on that goal. So we are checking in on those outcomes, those targets, to assess how are we as a partnership doing in meeting the goals that we've set for ourselves in that watershed agreement. Next. And we call that outcome attainment, kind of where we are in meeting those outcomes. Importantly, roughly half of these outcomes are their timeline, their deadline come up either in 2025 or before. So 2025 is a big year for us. We're right on that cusp of of really knowing how we did and figuring out what the future holds. And spoiler, we are not going to hit all of our outcomes. We are on course for many of them, but there are quite a few big ones where we're not quite on track. And we need to figure out what that future looks like for those outcomes. And that conversation is happening right now. It's going to be an intense one. It's going to be a multi-year one, but we need to figure out as a partnership, what are we going to be headed towards, and how do we kind of stay committed to our work and to our partnership and figure out the path that we discuss. And that is kind of what our executive council, the executive council of that partnership has program has asked us to do. The executive council are all the governors of the partner states, the mayor of the District of Columbia, our administrator of the EPA, and the Chesapeake Bay Commission's chair. So 2 years ago, they directed their principal staff to look at 2 things. First, how do we kind of continue our work leading up to 2025, because we're not taking our foot off the pedal, even as we approach that deadline. And then at the bottom, what do we do after? What is our partnership? What is the science telling us about the future, beyond 2025 for our partnership? And that is the really intense conversation that we are engaged in right now. Okay, next slide. Hand over to Adrienne.
There you go. All right, thank you, Anna. So as I said earlier, I'm Adrienne Kotula. I'm the Virginia Director for the Chesapeake Bay Commission. And the way we divide our work is Anna focuses on a lot of the federal efforts, is our primary contact, working with the federal agencies and working with Congress. And our staff directors work on some of those issues, some of the various goals. We each have our own assignments. But in addition to that, it is our primary responsibility to work for each of our delegations. And like Anna said, each state delegation has 7 members, which is comprised of 2 state senators, 3 delegates. In Virginia, it is a governor's appointee, who right now is the Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources, as well as 1 citizen member. So each of the states kind of chooses how they appoint those members. In our Senate, it is the Committee on Rules that does it. And the House of Delegates, it is the Speaker. So as you might expect with this latest election cycle, we're currently awaiting the appointments of all of our General Assembly members again. Somewhat distinct from the Rappahannock River Basin Commission, the districts that are represented are not spelled out in code, so it's completely up to the leadership in terms of what districts are represented on the commission. In previous years, you know, we've had some really strong advocates in the state Senate and in the House of Delegates. I think you all knew Senator Hanger really well. He was on the commission for 20 years, along with Linwood Lewis from the Eastern Shore, who was with us for 15 years between the House and the Senate. So we're looking forward to a new crop of state senators, a new crop of House of Delegates members moving forward and building up those internal advocates to the General Assembly. Next slide. So what I do, I spend a lot of my time on the specific goals and issues that are most important to the Virginia delegation, to the Commonwealth as a whole. You know, we were talking about how we're off track on some of the goals. I work with the state agencies really closely and trying to keep up on course. So they were the state agencies, 3 of them were back there in the corner trying to figure out which one was to blame for us being off course. I'll reserve my judgment on that topic. But just to let you know, I picked these out as kind of our top 5 issues. Sustainable fisheries. How many of you guys know the economic impact that the seafood industry has on Virginia? All right, it is $1.1 billion. So that's with a B, and those are 2019 dollars. So that's pre-inflation. So it's got to be at least 1.5 times that at this point. And that does not include the restaurant value. So that's including the profits that they're receiving, you know, off people's plate. So it's got to be more significant than that. So 2 of the fisheries that are not managed by regional fishery commissions, like the Atlantic States Marine Fisheries Commission, are the blue crab population and the oyster population. And those 2 fisheries are about 50% of the value of Virginia's seafood industry in and of themselves. And those 2 fisheries are managed by Virginia and Maryland through the Bay program very cooperatively. So I spend a lot of my time tracking how the oyster population and the blue crab population is doing, along with Atlantic striped bass and maybe. So those are a really key issue for the Virginia delegation. Toxic contaminants. That's one of the issues, like Anna said, where the states have gotten competitive between each other. So Virginia kind of took the first step. Legislation banning PFAS in firefighting foam. That is one of the contaminants that's been shown actually at airports to have a lot of impact on local water supply. So again, we were the first ones out of the gate banning that substance. Then Maryland kind of took the ball and ran with it and has expanded some of the legislation on that front to rugs and carpets and firefighting equipment. So now we're trying to take that lead back from them with some legislation that was passed during this latest General Assembly session, looking at monitoring for PFAS concentrations in drinking water supplies, and Pennsylvania is similarly working on legislation right now. So that's kind of where the interplay between the delegations comes in and how we can learn from each other and build upon one another. Climate resiliency. That is actually a report that we did, a tri-state report that we did a few years back, looking at the 5 pillars of what a state climate resilience legislative structure would look like. The Virginia delegation has really led the way and on this front, and we have passed about 5 pieces of legislation on this matter, one of which was the establishment of the Resilient Virginia Revolving Fund, which I'm happy to say now has roughly $125 million in it to help local governments stand up their programs and address the various issues from flooding. I'm sure we're going to see impact on this storm today, as well as shoreline issues that the communities are going to be facing through time. Environmental literacy, you heard Brent talking about, what was it, 11,000 students that you guys have touched over the last year, just in the last year. But one of the big pillars of the BAY program is making sure that each child graduating from school in the watershed is environmentally literate. A big piece of that is providing those students with meaningful watershed educational experiences. And I'm proud to say that the Virginia delegation has been successful in re-establishing an Office of Environmental Education at the Department of Conservation and Recreation, creating a requirement for a statewide environmental literacy plan, and really infusing the local districts and the local nonprofits with the ability and the funding to stand up those types of programs. Actually, I have to go back and bring you some of the grants so we can award them out to the various entities later this month. And then finally, Kevin's going to talk about water quality a lot more than I am, but you guys probably hear about the Chesapeake Bay total maximum daily load more than anything else. I think one of our jobs is to make sure you understand that it's not the end all be all of our Chesapeake Bay obligation, but it is certainly the thing that has gotten the most focus because we have the regulatory drivers behind it. But also, you know, every person in this room has an impact on water quality, and all of the things we do on the landscape does as well. So obviously there were some cows back on that previous slide, but agriculture is Virginia's largest industry. That has $82 billion worth of an impact on Virginia's economy, and a similarly outsized impact on our landscape and the water quality in the Chesapeake Bay, which means I necessarily spend a very large amount of my time working in that sector. So you're going to hear from Matt about the cost share program. I spend a decent amount of time working on that with our members, making sure it gets adequate funding, making sure that it's running efficiently, effectively. And then we also, as a commission, do studies looking at the most cost-effective practices, the ones that will not only get you the largest pollution reduction, but also do so in a way that has the smallest impact on the state's bottom line and the federal bottom line. So obviously there's more that goes into water quality, stormwater, wastewater treatment plants. Those are another very, very large topic of conversation in the General Assembly. But that's just a snapshot of what we do. And if you guys have any questions about it, I'm sure Anna and I would be happy to answer them. So thank you, guys.
Thank you. Are there any questions from commission members, audience members? All right, go ahead.
Yes. So I was just going back into the on the slide on outcome attainment. And if you can go through where it goes. So you've got a couple of them on here on the tree canopy and stampers. Outcome that's listed as off course. I wonder if you could just expand on that. At least those two a little bit more. Why they're off course and. Yeah, so for each of these for most of these outcomes, there's a numerical target that we're trying to hit as a watershed. For those the number that we put out as what we're aiming towards as far as forest buffers throughout the watershed or tree canopy cover, we're not on track to hit that number. So we're both looking at what we've accomplished over the last 10, 15, even 40 years, depending on where we set our baseline for each outcome. And then kind of what's the rate of implementation that we're seeing right now, and we chart out, are we on the right trajectory to hit that number by 2025? And for those and everything on that side of the table or not. So we're gonna come pretty grossly under for our forest buffer outcome. We're making good progress, but we set a really high bar for ourselves, so we know that's what's necessary. And we just won't hit it. So we need to assess whether it's strategy changes or better understanding our goal, what we need to do about that outcome moving forward to make sure that you're making progress.
So the General Assembly did make some efforts toward addressing that this year. Is that being taken into account? I mean, I was just looking back to see some of the work we did. We passed, there's the creation of the Department of Forestry on forest land and urban tree canopy conservation plan. So that's got an outline. I was just going through it while we were looking at this one. I don't know if that's been taken into consideration with some of those efforts.
Yeah, so I think, so we did play a role in that legislation, the forest conservation plan legislation, and I know there'll be, a work group developed and kind of a path forward made on that, and certainly forestry can talk to that a bit more. So that particular effort, the planning effort, is not going to be taken into account in the tree canopy goal, but certainly if we make progress as a result of that plan, it will. So a lot of the work that we do is that ground building, making sure Virginia can be successful. That's another one where, Maryland has a forest conservation plan. And so I was looking back at that for a lot of the information to help us build in that effort. Also, these two in particular, it's interesting that you zeroed in on them. That's where kind of the conflict between the conservation and development issue comes to a head. I agree. So that's kind of why the forest conservation plan is so important at this point for the Commonwealth, because we need to be more thoughtful with the impacts that we're making to our canopy and looking back at how we can grow more canopy in the urban areas that have already been established.
Yeah, there certainly was a lot of chatter and a lot of conversations back and forth, particularly with Planning District 8. And I'll just be perfectly candid, that makes the General Assembly members, some of them get prickly. Why are we having so many discussion about it? And they feel it impact from the rest of the Commonwealth on push on other conversations, but we're still pushing on these with tree canopy and that, particularly in that planning district. So there is some tension, absolutely.
Oh, yeah, we live through that tension on a yearly basis with these topics, in the General Assembly, for sure. A lot of the development, conservation interplay is kind of what we have to tackle regularly. One of our climate resilience bills was actually on climate resilience and comprehensive plans, and how do we get that in front of the localities, but not create the mandate, so it's finding that balance in between everything. And that's what we're kind of here as the legislative branch staffers to help figure out with our members.
Yeah, all right, thank you.
Any other questions, comments? Anybody online? All right, thank you all. Next up, we have Chesapeake Bay Program Overview and Rappahannock River Progress. Kevin, welcome, thank you. No problem.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very happy to be here. While the slides are coming up, I'm Kevin McLean. I'm Chesapeake Bay Program Manager with the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality. And our agency serves as the coordinating body for Virginia's participation in that broader Chesapeake Bay program partnership that Anna and Adrienne both alluded to. I do have to say, I think this is the first time I've presented at an airport before, and my kids were very confused this morning. I told them I was going to an airport for work, but I wasn't getting on a plane to go somewhere. So I appreciate the change of scenery and the different venue here. You can go ahead to the next slide and then right on to the next one too. So as I mentioned, we're responsible, my team at EQ, for kind of coordinating how Virginia participates in that broad program, that big wheel that Anna went over of all the different jurisdictions that play a part in the Bay program. And that means that primarily we are working with Virginia's administration to keep them informed on everything that's going on with the Bay program and keep us heading in the right direction for some of those goals that we talked about that are on track, off track, that we're head on, behind on, making sure we're moving in the right direction. And we also work very closely with EPA's Chesapeake Bay Program Office, that is specifically the team, also headquartered in Annapolis, that oversees the Bay Program and the partnership, largely in the form of receiving significant amounts of federal funding on behalf of Virginia and then dispersing it to partner agencies, NGOs, local governments, and I'll go through some of those. And then also reporting back on all the work that's done with that funding. We have an obligation to report all of the implementation that's done on all the projects that are built with that funding to the federal government to get us credit towards those goals that we've been talking about. So I'll walk through some of the funding opportunities, spend some good time on where we are in terms of that progress, both across the Bay watershed in Virginia and here in the Rappahannock Basin. And then walk through some of the other projects we're kind of working on and leave time for questions for the next one. So, same as Anna said, you're not gonna be able to read everything that's on the screen. You're not really even meant to. You do have the handout there in front of you. But what this is diving a little further into that Bay Program partnership structure that we already talked about and showing how we as a state participate in that. And what I will say is that the Chesapeake Executive Council, which Governor Youngkin sits on, those are the main signatories in that Bay Program partnership. We work through a number of folks on his cabinet to keep them informed of what's going on with the Bay Program. He tells us what direction he wants to be heading on certain things, and we work collaboratively on that. They are the body that meets annually to sign off on the really big decisions. And the goal is, once we get something to the Executive Council, we have already briefed everyone up. Everyone's on the same page. We're moving in the right direction. I don't want to be responsible for the time that we get to the Executive Council and they start clashing on something and we can't get the signatories to sign off on something. The goal is to do the legwork ahead of time for that. The Principal Staff Committee, that's where Secretary of Natural and Historic Resources Travis Boyle serves. We work very closely with his office to make sure that they've got all that information, all that background to be making those big decisions. And then at the management board level, which is where a whole lot of the work and research and input comes together within the Bay Program, our Deputy Secretary Stephanie Talon serves on that group. And that is all fueled by a wide variety of what we call GITs and work groups, goal implementation teams, and work groups that are focused in certain areas and on certain topics. Ranging anywhere from wastewater to ag to forestry, all the different things that feed into this larger Bay Program. And then myself and a couple others at DEQ are the primary staff support for them. And then I have a whole team of people that really support our grant funds, our data reporting and all that. Next slide. So right now, and it's already been alluded to earlier, we find ourselves at a fairly historic point when it comes to federal funding and what's coming in through the Bay Program and gather the jurisdictions. We do often say jurisdictions because we don't want DC to feel left out by saying the Bay states, it's the Bay jurisdictions. So we include everyone that way. What we have coming in right now, we have been working with, I have tons of abbreviations up here. I'll give you some more background on what all those are. But CBIG and CBRAP has a Chesapeake Bay Implementation Grant and the Chesapeake Bay Regulatory and Accountability Program. Those are the two main sources of federal funding we've been managing for quite some time now. CBIC goes all the way back to the eighties with kind of the creation of the Bay Program Partnership. CB-RAP began in 2009 by executive order under President Obama. And now we have IIJA or BIL, goes by many names, the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act. This is a result of some COVID recovery bills. And on average, we have about $3.5 million a year from each of those grants. We're working about $11 million a year that comes through our office and then out to our partners and folks that are doing the actual implementation. We're in year 2 of IIJA right now. In our first year, most of that funding, about 3.1 million, went to a couple of our big existing programs. That was DCR's VAX program, the Ag Cost Share program, and the Department of Health's septic pump out program, because we kind of got the money quickly, had to turn it around. They were kind of just putting everything together, and we wanted to put it into strong existing programs that need that additional funding. Year 2, we had a little more time to plan ahead, kind of start to broaden our programs, and most of that funding is going to our planning district commissions, including some of the PDCs here in this region, to allow them to pursue with their localities more implementation projects. And this is ranging anywhere from living shoreline restoration projects to septic pump out programs, to permeable pavement and converting of impervious surfaces to more of that green infrastructure type stuff that was mentioned earlier. Years 3 through 5 are yet to be determined in terms of exactly how much funding we'll get and exactly where it's going to be spent. We're always open to suggestions and getting a sense from the local level of where that money needs to go. And I'm happy to have that conversation as well. Next slide, please. And then one other initiative I really wanted to highlight here, something we've been working on the last couple of years, is SWIP, or the State Lands Watershed Implementation Plan. We operate as a state under a WIP. We're in WIP phase 3 right now. That is the broad plan with all of our partners that guides what work we're doing, by when we're going to do it to accomplish those goals, primarily of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment reductions in the bay. A subset of that larger WIP is the State Lands WIP, or SWIP, which is specifically recognizing that we as a state agency, all of our partner state agencies, we're constantly asking people to do conservation projects, to do implementation on their property, usually private property. And under the previous administration, decided, hey, you know, the state of Virginia owns an awful lot of land too. We really should be trying to do some more work on our own land to improve water quality. So we started with just $500,000 in federal dollars, and then another $1 million in the 2023 General Assembly. We're working on, hopefully next year, several more $1 million, because there's a lot of growing demand for this. But this is just a really cool opportunity to keep in mind, because a lot of times when we talk about VAX, the Ag Cost Share program, or BCAP, which is the kind of smaller scale residential stormwater program, and some of the other big funding opportunities that are out there, a lot of times state-owned land is a gap that doesn't have funding opportunities like this. And a lot of universities, community colleges, places like that qualify for this. So there are quite a few places that can qualify. So when you're working in your locality with your partners, this is an opportunity. You know, I've got some examples up here that we're working with Longwood University right now in some of our state parks, as well as we've got some work going on with the Old Dominion and UVA right now. So really kind of moving those things forward. So just keep that in mind. Next slide, please. So the real meat of what we do is making sure we are tracking our progress towards meeting our mandated goals. The TMDL, or total maximum daily load, was already mentioned. That is the overarching structure that kind of mandates the water quality goal we need to reach. There's a whole lot that happens within that to kind of guide what we're doing. The two main things, well, three things I want to call your attention to on these next few graphs. The green line that travels across the bar graph, that is our federal planning target. Within the TMDL, that is the level which we agreed we would legally get below in terms of nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment loadings. So that's the line we have to get below. This next to last bar, which I know is tiny, especially for folks in the room, says 2023 provisional. That is our total progress data from last year. It hasn't finished going through all the review by EPA and everybody else. We don't expect it to change, but it's just a disclaimer that that's not final. The very last bar is our WIP3 scenario. So I mentioned our watershed implementation plan for the state of Virginia. That is our broad plan of everything we're gonna do to reduce the amount of nitrogen going into the bay in this case. So this is where we will be when we reach our total WIP implementation. So that's a future scenario that we haven't quite gotten to yet. What I do want to call attention to, you'll see on this one, this is for the full bay watershed in Virginia. We're getting very, very close to our total nitrogen loadings. And you'll see that in particular, that top dark blue bar is where we're making the most progress over the years. That is our wastewater sector. We've seen massive improvements in wastewater technology. We've funded a lot of work there. Still have a ways to go in some of our other sectors, which I'll dive into a little bit. The next slide is baywide for phosphorus. One thing I want to point out, well, same caveats as the last slide, but just keep in mind that for phosphorus, the scale of this is about 1/10 of the nitrogen loadings. The previous slide had about 80 million pounds of nitrogen. This is 8 million at the top bar. So just keep in mind that the perspective on this is a little different. We are actually very, very, very close to our phosphorus goals. And there are some additional changes that are going to be rolled into our 2023 provisional data that should actually get us across that green federal planning target line. Has to do with some changes about 10 years ago to the types of fertilizers that were sold for lawn establishment that were never kind of accounted for in the model. So we are very close on phosphorus. Next slide. Sorry, you're doing multiple things. So this is breaking down for nitrogen to just the Rappahannock River Basin. And here's where you can really see what's happening a little bit more locally. And I want to call attention to the orange bars that you can see year over year trending. That is the agricultural sector. That is very good news because based on how we designed our WIPs and the work that we need to do, there baywide in the state of Virginia, there's a ton of additional nitrogen reduction that need to come from the ag sector. The Rappahannock Basin in particular is doing a very good job with that. And you'll see this, I won't steal Director Wells' thunder, but you can see that this, total loading of the last several years is really starting to drop off noticeably, and that has a lot to do with historic investments by the General Assembly in funding our BACS program. Next slide. So this is phosphorus loadings in the Rappahannock Basin. Not as much to call your attention to on this one. The trend is downward, which is what we always want to see. And I'll just note also that we usually also have sediment graphs that go these nitrogen phosphorus sediment being the three big pollutants that we deal with, but we have been actually below our federal planning targets for sediment from the very beginning. So the graphs are a little less informative because every bar is below that green line. So next slide, please. And then I kind of just wanted to cover a few initiatives and things we're focused on right now. This map that you see here, I specifically wanted to bring to your attention this idea of MEBs or most effective basins. I promise at the start, we talk in like acronyms all the time. I'm doing my best to define every one of them. If I miss any of them, just let me know. These MEBs were designated by EPA in 2022. Mostly tied to the IIJA or infrastructure funds that I mentioned earlier. There are two specific things that they were aiming to target by designating these basins, and it's how they were determined, which is maybe what they call nitrogen effectiveness. How effective is that land area in reducing the total amount of nitrogen making it into the bay, into the main stem of the bay specifically, which, as you can see, goes well beyond Virginia up to the north. And then also looking at census data on disadvantaged communities. So making sure that we're getting funding in the places that need the investment the most, and that historically have not received as much of that funding. Because of where Virginia is on the main stem of the bay, and because of our really, I would say, effective history at reducing pollutants into the bay, when those MEBs were first designated, we had the bay portion of the eastern shore and a sliver of the northern neck were our MEBs for the state of Virginia. When you looked at Maryland and Pennsylvania, the vast majority of their area fell into those most effective basins. And so we went through an almost year-long process with EPA to say, hey, we are really looking forward to this funding that's coming our way. That's at $3.5 million or so a year which is not a huge amount of money in the grand scheme of things, but when we're largely talking about residential scale projects and septic pump house, things like that, that is a whole lot of individual projects across that landscape. And we were concerned that we wouldn't be able to put that money to effectively use in an area that small, especially because those are areas we've focused our funding on in the past already. So we proposed some alternate measures of the impact it will have on local waterways, looking at harmful algal blooms, chlorophyll A in certain water bodies that have a really big impact on health of the overall bay. And we were able to expand a huge amount of the Rappahannock Basin, as well as parts up into Northern Virginia, and most crucially for this funding, I would say, almost the entire Shenandoah Valley, because we have a lot of additional ag work we want to do there. But so that was a very involved process, but all that is to say that we are constantly trying to advocate on behalf of Virginia and on behalf of the localities that want to do this work to make sure that the funding is available in places that need it the most. So I think that was a big win for Virginia. I mentioned a few of these other things as we went through, and again, some of it's been touched on already. Urban tree canopy, riparian forest buffers, and wetland restoration are big focus areas within the broader Bay program right now. Specifically because those are some of the BMP types, best management practice types that were the furthest behind on our goals, because we set those really high ambitious goals. So we're trying to focus funding there. And then we really are encouraging our planning district commissions, our watershed roundtables, and our other partners to find ways to pursue actual implementation, meaning getting projects built, continuing to do the important work they do of education and outreach, keeping localities and constituents and students informed about the important work we're doing, but then also building those projects and getting them in the ground. We do provide some funding for VCAP, which has been mentioned a couple times already. And we're also pursuing some what we call pay for dedicated performance pilot projects. Say all those P's 4 times fast. It's a mouthful, but basically what we're doing is by targeting specifically nitrogen, what we're looking at non-point source nitrogen runoff in areas that we haven't really been able to get work done in the past. We are paying, it's usually ag producers is who we're working with the most right now. Paying them per pound of nitrogen that they actually reduce, rather than just saying, here's a flat amount of money to build a project that will reduce nitrogen. We're targeting areas that have a particularly large amount of nitrogen coming out of groundwater and springs, things like that. And we'll say, we will pay you X number of dollars per pound you reduce. So it's a real incentive for folks that we maybe haven't reached otherwise. And we're finding that we're getting per pound of nitrogen a lot lower cost of actually reducing those pollutants out. The last slide, I believe. Oh, no. One more. This is just one for, I always like to leave folks with kind of a positive outlook. I don't expect anyone to take in everything that's in this graph or even understand exactly what we're looking at, but this goes all the way back to 1985. It's up through 2021 right now, but this is a measure of eutrophication units in the Chesapeake Bay, and particularly in Virginia's portion of the bay. That's a measure of dissolved oxygen that's in the water, as well as some other nutrients, that gives us a picture of how well we're doing. You hear about dead zones in the bay. That's when there is no dissolved oxygen and things can't survive. So we want there to be as much dissolved oxygen as possible. And what you can see is over time, a very clear trend where we are seeing the overall health of Virginia's portion of the bay increasing as the eutrophication units go down. Just want to emphasize that there's a lot of good work that's happening. We still have ways to go, but that we're doing well. And then that should be it. So, who has questions?
Thank you, Kevin. Are there any questions? I have one quick question. How is the model, like you seem to be getting more and more intense, like rain and storm events around here? How is the modeling being adjusted to account for that type of thing, or is it?
The model is not being adjusted to account for that necessarily. The model is actually built on an average weather period back in the 90s. That's what the basis is that we're comparing against. So we know when we compare, these loadings to how much rain we got in a given year, that maybe that's one of the things that impacted whether we did better or worse. But the actual basis for the model doesn't change. At the same time, as we approach 2025, which is kind of our specifically our big goal line for these reductions. We're already working on what the next phase is gonna look like and a new model that will do a more accurate job of kind of capturing all that.
Oh, I do have a question.
It's important to address that, though, they are adjusting, the agencies are, like the runoff reduction method
That is
is
true.
being changed,
Yep.
which is determines how much phosphorus you have to remove from the stormwater before it leaves the site. And that helps us beef up the erosion and sediment control measures, as well as your stormwater BMPs on a development site, which helps keep stormwater nutrients. So there is work going on, reacting to the increases in precipitation.
Absolutely.
You mentioned that offering to reduce the loading, paying per pound rather than giving money to specific programs. What are you finding that the farmers are doing that is the most effective?
So that specific pilot program, we're dealing with, they're called legacy denitrifying bioreactors. Very long name to basically say a huge pit filled with wood chips, is basically what that means. So that is something where we're specifically targeting legacy nitrogen in groundwater. We're saying, hey, we know that a whole lot of nitrogen has been put into the water over time. Doesn't necessarily mean that the current landowner or the exact landowner where the spring is emerging from is the person who put all that nitrogen in, but we recognize it's a big source of nitrogen that we can treat, and it's a very cost-effective way to target and treat that versus a whole variety of very good, very effective projects that generally treat an agricultural field or stormwater coming off of a home that aren't necessarily targeting the heaviest loadings of nitrogen, if that makes sense. So by being able to kind of target specifically where these hotspots are, and we're essentially paying a rental fee to the landowner because you have to take an area out of production and build that. They're usually like the size of a football field. It's big areas. But then also paying them, per pound of nitrogen. So the more nitrogen that's coming out that's getting removed, the more money they get. And when you average all that out, we're actually paying less per pound of nitrogen that way than just trying to hit everything everywhere. That makes sense.
Yeah.
But it also, it's not something that can be scaled the same way that the VAX program or the DCAT program or stuff like that can, because we're targeting specific spots. So. Yes.
If we could go back to the MEV expansion slide, so how was it decided that those areas are getting the attention given those programs?
Sure.
How does that work?
So at the simplest level, what EPA did for Virginia was lower the bar for nitrogen effectiveness. There was kind of a minimum score that they assigned, and there's a whole lot of calculations that went into determining that, what nitrogen effectiveness means. And basically we were saying, hey, we recognize that a lot of the water that's coming down from Pennsylvania and Maryland, it's having a more direct impact on those upper reaches of the bay. But here in Virginia, let's not fail to account for local waterway health and what we can do, just because it's not gonna have exactly the same impact on the bay as that will. So the very simple answer is they just lowered the score for us, which allowed us to expand it a little bit. There was a number of other things, like I mentioned, harmful algal bloom, primarily in the Shenandoah River and Lake Anna are areas that we've specifically been targeting in Virginia for additional work. The James River with chlorophyll A was one that we attempted, but as you can see, we weren't successful necessarily on that one. The James River watershed isn't really represented here, but we basically asked them to consider, instead of just a single set of criteria across the entire Bay watershed, some specific considerations here in Virginia that allow us to expand that a little more and still, have a positive impact on water quality in the Bay. So. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. So were they in more need of programs to help reduce the nitrogen?
Basically, yeah. So essentially, when you drop that number down a little bit, these areas in particular kind of fit in there because there's a lot of additional nitrogen loads coming from all the ag production in that area.
Gotcha. Okay.
Any other questions?
Elvin, do you have a comment you want to make? No, question, I'm doing this from memory, which is dangerous, but this time last year, Director Wonderford was here. And he got into a discussion about identifying some progress that had not been properly accounted for.
Right.
And it would impact those charts that you were in the earlier slides. Has that been accounted for in those slides?
Yes. I'm sure the phosphorus daylight.
Grading.
There we go. So I mentioned that at like this high of a level, and I'll dig into that a little bit more. And what I was saying is that in 2013, the Virginia General Assembly passed what is often referred to as a lawn fertilizer phosphorus ban. It's probably better defined as a restriction. You're not supposed to buy phosphorus-laden lawn fertilizer except for lawn establishment after new construction. That went into effect in 2013. We know from sales data and a ton of other information that's been collected by VDAX and a couple other groups over the past decade that has reduced the amount of phosphorus that's been going into the bay from Virginia over that time. Because the model is not updated, but every 5 years, 10 years, depending, or in terms of doing like a model, they call it a model run, which means making some adjustments and recalibrating and resetting the model. That had never been accounted for in it. And like Roban, Evan Bernowski, who's one of our chief deputies at EQ, really dug into that and said, hey, we think that you've missed something here that's significant. Worked with EPA for over a year to kind of update that information that goes into the model. And so that is the one thing I mentioned that will change on this chart, the 2023 provisional bar. Once we do finish updating the model, that bar is going to drop below that green federal planning target. So for Virginia, we will have met our phosphorus.
I wasn't listening to you close enough. So
I ran through a whole bunch of stuff real quick, and sometimes it's like, well, I'll just mention this, but not really dig into it real deep. So.
Thank you.
Yeah. Any other questions?
Any questions? Anybody online? No, thank you.
Awesome. Thank you all very much.
Next up, the software program. Welcome back. Sorry.
Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to the presentation. I'm Matt Wells. I'm the director of the Department of Conservation and Recreation. I've got James Martin somewhere over there online. He's our division director for soil and water, who handles the cost share program. If you have any hard questions, he's going to take those. But I'm happy to be here today to talk about the cost share program. Eldon asked me to give a bit of a primer / overview and then an update. But I think, so some of this may be reviewed for some of you, particularly water districts. But I think it's a nice progression for folks to be able to see sort of the Chesapeake Bay Commission for the holistic program, DEQ that sort of has oversight of a number of the different moving components in this. And then this one specific program that we have. Next slide. So just a little bit about the agency. Department of Conservation and Recreation is the Commonwealth's lead natural resources agency. Sorry, other natural resources agencies were the most fun. We have a pretty broad portfolio that includes our 42 state parks. Number 43 is going to be opening this summer out in Culpeper Battlefields. 67 now natural area preservers, including Crow's Nest. We have oversight over a number of land conservation programs, including the Land Preservation Tax Credit, the Virginia Land Conservation Foundation, soil and water conservation, which we talked about today, dam regulation, which we talked about a little bit the last time I was here, and then floodplain and resilience. So Kevin showed a version of this chart. I wanted to bring it back up. There's a little bit of chart crime here, but you probably can't see this, but on the right side here is 85 within 2009. 2023 is here, and then our official WIP goal is here. And Kevin kind of talked to this story. This is nitrogen, by the way. That's what we typically focus on the ag side. If you can take care of nitrogen in the ag sector, you pretty much take care of everything else. along with it. And so what you can see here is significant reductions in the top blue bar, which is the wastewater industry. We've done a really good job of that over time. The ag sector, you can see in mud, which is the yellow here, you can see some reduction, but a much smaller reduction. Our goals for 2025 in the WIP are 13.1 million pounds. In 2023, we landed about 17.8, which means by next year, theoretically, we're supposed to reduce an additional 4.7 million pounds, which is pretty significant. So how do we get at that, right? So with wastewater, with point source, you have an outfall, you have one output that you can treat. It's not necessarily cheap, but you know where they are, and you can get them. With ag or non-point source, you have a lot of different areas where you may have nutrient runoff or pollution getting in the waterway. That makes it a lot more difficult to get at. So from a functional standpoint, the method that most people use to address ag nutrient runoff are best management practices, right? You put something on the ground with the producer that prevents the nitrogen, the phosphorus, and the sediment from reaching the waterway, whether that's a cover crop, whether that's stream fencing, whether that's manure storage, the whole suite of things. Most of these practices have some level of ROI for the producer, right? They either cut costs or they help generate more income, but they all have a cost associated with them. And there's a few ways that ag producers can get money to support these practices. There are federal programs like Natural Resources Conservation Services, NRCS. Some nonprofits have programs, there are tax credits available, but the primary vehicle that we have in Virginia is the Virginia Agricultural Cost Share, or VAX program. That makes us fairly unique. Most states have some version of cost share in some form or another, but I don't know that any other state really has as robust a state level program as we do. And then, you know, when we talk to our other Chesapeake Bay Commission states, they're frequently envious of the program we have, and I kind of rub it in their face a little bit. Nothing like that. So, but that makes us unique. So the program is voluntary. I want to emphasize that these are voluntary practices. So it's a voluntary water quality improvement program that producers, farmers, whether you're growing crops or you're raising animals, implement that provides cost share incentives for over 60 best management practices. So we administer the program. It is overseen and technically managed by the State Soil and Water Conservation Board, which I was just at a meeting this morning that they had at Bear Creek Lake State Park. And then the actual program itself is implemented by one of our 47 soil and water conservation districts. So one thing I want to break out here is that there are a couple different components to this. There are the cost shared dollars. That is what goes to the producer, right? We'll give you X percentage of whatever to put cover crops in the ground. And then there is funding that we provide to the districts for their efforts. So they get money for what's called technical assistance, or the TA, which is how they market the program, they engineer the practices, how they work with the producer to get the practice on the ground. And then they also get funding for what's called admin and ops, which is back office, rental, the things that help them operate. And I mentioned that, you can go to the next one. And this is just a map here of our soil and water conservation districts, and many of them are multi-county. But these are independent political entities. They have elected directors, they have staff. We partner with them, we help train them, we support them, and we fund them, but the Commonwealth doesn't directly control them. We work with them and they are bound by obviously the laws of the Commonwealth and then the rules that we attach to the funding source, but they are independent political entities. Let me go to that. So I mentioned that there are 60 plus BMPs. There's a very long list available online if you want to go look at it. These are a couple of examples of some of the best management practices that we will fund. One thing to note here is that we kind of divide them into two buckets. There are annual practices like cover crops that you have to put in every year, and so you can get funding for them every year. And then there are structural practices like animal waste management, that we will help support. You build them once and then they stick around for a long time. They do have a lifespan in the model, we'll talk about later, because that can be an issue. But you don't have to do them, every year. Go next one. This is the top 10 practices here. They probably account for 95% of our nutrient reductions. You can see, so we've got kind of internal benchmarks here that we use to judge by. We are ahead of the game. In some instances of conservation, that we're doing really well on. We are really behind on some of them, like animal waste management. You can see here, we've actually lost some as some practices expire or accounting methods change. But this is just to show that really, if you vote, these are kind of the 10 that we really tend to focus on. Go to the next one. So from a functional standpoint, districts and our other partner organizations are out there talking to our producers, engaging with them, getting them to enroll in the program. It is a lot of grassroots efforts, right? Going from farm to farm, talking to farmers, getting them interested in the program. Some farmers are readily interested. Some are not super interested in participating in a government program. Some are just kind of apathetic about it. So there's a different level of engagement for all of them. Once the producer is ready to go, they enter into a contract with the local stormwater conservation district. There are standards that the practices have to be designed to. There is some engineering that is frequently involved in that. Sometimes the district can handle if they have engineering approval authority. Sometimes the department has to handle. But from there, it goes through a process where it's constructed. There are field inspections and there's some spot checks throughout the lifespan. There is a requirement that for structural practices, there's a lifespan that has to be inspected. Go to the next one. All right. So I mentioned that all of this costs money. And in order to figure out how much money we think the program needs in a given year, we do what's called a needs assessment. And the needs assessment is developed in partnership with a work group that engages nonprofit groups, other state agencies, Chesapeake Bay Commission supports this on the water districts, and some groups that represent the producers. And we sit everybody down and we talk through, okay, here is kind of the roadmap for the program. One of the things that we have really tried to do under this administration is bring a lot more visibility into how we develop the needs assessment. It used to be kind of, okay, here's the number, what do you think about it? And now we really spend a day or two and we walk through all of the justification and the rationalization behind where we think this number is going. And the way that we generally get there is we have our water quality goals, right? We have the nitrogen goal that we are supposed to be hitting under the WIP. We have a timeline by which we are supposed to be achieving it. We have a suite of practices, and we generally know how much they are supposed to cost, at least in theory. And so when you take all those things up, you just sort of, then you divide the pie and you get a year-over-year number for how much the program should need. One thing I do want to flag here is that there was legislation in 2023 that impacted what we call the Bay backstop. That original iteration of that had a 2025 deadline for nutrient management plans and stream exclusion practices. That bill moved it back to 2027 in recognition of the fact that we probably weren't going to make those requirements by 2025. It also created another stakeholder group that gets into more of the details about how we're going to get there. What are the interim benchmarks? What's the ultimate benchmarks? There are some potential regulatory triggers. If we don't meet benchmarks by 2027, some of these voluntary practices could in some instances become mandatory. Whether that timeline stays at 2027 is dependent on whether we do a good job funding this program, right? So the triggers are tied to whether the state holds up its end of the bargain. All right, you can't read this. It's a spreadsheet, a lot of numbers. This is, I think, like 8 on a 12-tab spreadsheet. Adrienne's like probably got flashbacks back there from developing this. So this is the summary page for the needs assessment. And this totals up all of the inputs, right? All the practices, how much everything costs, we divide it up and then they spit out a number here. So just kind of to talk through the rationale here. This is 2027. This is our target year. So we are saying that we want to have all structural practices in place by 2027. That includes a nutrient management plan and stream exclusion, which ties into the legislation that was passed. And then you have annual practices that continue to need funding in the out year. So if you could read this chart, what you would see is that this number here in 2027 is $210 million, and then it drops to about 80 in the out years as we go away from structural practices and into more maintenance and funding annual practices. The other thing to flag here is that what we really focus on is the total amount that needs to be put into play to fund our nutrient reductions in the Bay watershed. From there, we break it into a state share, which is 40%, a producer share of 25%, because it is a cost share program, and then a federal share of 35%. The federal share is not always materialized in the fashion that we sort of project it to, but you gotta make some assumptions. We also in recent years have tried to factor some inflation into it year over year as we go through, not so much forward-looking years, but adjusting kind of where we are at any given year. When we get to what we need for the state share of the Bay, we can also take into account what's needed in the Southern Rivers watershed or outside the Bay, right? All the Bay does not flow, or all the state doesn't flow to the Chesapeake Bay. We have a portion of the state that flows into other watersheds, but we also want to make sure that we're supporting our producers in those areas as well, and we're funding DMPs there. And so we allocate them a portion. So right now, 70% of the funding goes to the Bay watershed, 30% goes to the Southern Rivers. We then also add on a percentage for technical assistance to the districts. We take all of that, we add it up, and that's how we get the needs assessment, which for the upcoming budget cycle was about $182 million. Go to the next slide. All right, so we know how much we need. How do we get there? So the funding for the program is provided through the Virginia Natural Resources Commitment Fund, which is a sub-fund of the Water Quality Improvement Fund, which is all technical stuff that you don't really need to worry about, but that's where the money sits in the budget. It means it's semi-walled off from other purposes to the degree that any money is ever actually walled off in the budget. Typically, the budget provides for a base level of funding for the program. So it's usually about $35 million for cost share for what goes to the producers, about $4.5 million for district technical assistance, $10, $9, $11 million for admin and operations for the districts. This also includes money for them for dam safety. They own a number of dams, so they get some funding for that. And then some funding for the Water Quality Improvement Fund Reserve. Additional funding usually comes from revenue surpluses. There's also some money that we can get from the recordation fee, but typically funding comes from surpluses, which means that in years where we have revenue surpluses, the program's been well funded. In years where we haven't had surpluses, not been well funded. This year, because of the way the budget cycle kind of worked out, all of the money that would have been available as a surplus for this coming biennium was more or less accounted for in the amended 24 budget that was adopted in September. There's not really a surplus to work with for this budget cycle for the cost share program. And so this year, the budget uses a combination of general fund and non-general fund from the Monsanto settlement to fund the program. I think that's significant because again, you know, there are statutory requirements that the Water Quality Improvement Fund is supposed to be funded out of revenue surpluses. And so again, that kind of walls it off. It kind of says you should do this. This is discretionary funding. This could have been used for anything. And so I think for the governor, for the legislature to continue to commit this to the cost share program is significant and something that we're very grateful for. And in fact, because of the budget action last year, the program is fully funded in 25, and then this budget fully funds it in 26. We go to the next slide. The other thing that I'll just note on that one is that once the money goes into the system and then gets allocated out to the various districts, there's a formula we work with the small water. So I mentioned full funding. That is not something that has happened in the past. And in fact, the 2022 budget, the budget was adopted in 2022, was the first time that we have ever fully funded the cost share program. You can see here in 2020, it kind of gets close, doesn't actually overlap, they're about $2 million short. But over time, we have not, this orange line here is the needs assessment, the blue is funding allocation. We have not funded this program in the way that the needs assessment said we should. And it's actually a little bit worse than it looks, because in some periods over here, I mentioned that we're using 2027 as the goal now because of state legislation. A lot of the work was pushed out into 2030. And so the needs assessment was even lower than it might have otherwise been. And so we weren't even getting sort of the reduced level of funding that we were shooting for. As you can see here, for 2023, for 2024, for 2025, and under the budget that's on the governor's desk right now for 2026, we would be fully funding this program. Also flag for our friends of the district that the level that they've gotten for administration and operations stayed pretty steady at about $6 million through 22. That has been bumped up in recognition of the fact that we are pumping a ton more money into this program here than we were over here. And so you need a lot more of a support structure to make sure that you're able to effectively use those dollars. If I'm being somewhat parochial here, I will note that funding the department hasn't necessarily done that either. So we have been working with relatively stable resources. There is some stuff in the conference budget that would add some additional positions to soil and water to help that keep as well. A lot of our positions in soil and water are federally funded through some pass-through from our friend at DEQ, which is appreciated. So let's see. All right. So just kind of wrapping up here again, we had historic levels of funding in the 23-24 budget, 256 million, even more funding in the amended 24 budget at 287 million, and even more funding in the currently proposed budget of 182 million. So we really have stepped up the state's commitment to funding this program and supporting our producers. We're also doing a whole bunch of other stuff to try to expedite getting the money on the ground to support the districts and what they're doing to make sure that we're reaching out to farmers. And can you back up to, I think, like my second slide? I wanted to go back to the chart. Right. So what has that kind of gotten us from an environmental standpoint? The program is headed in the right direction from a funding standpoint. I think we're also starting to see real progress on the environmental side. So if you look at here in 1985, that's about 25 million pounds of nitrogen. If you look here, I mentioned that's about 17.8 million pounds of nitrogen. 950,000 pounds of that reduction came last year, right, which was a record. So we were starting to see significant, we're not here yet, but you can see the curve starting to bend down. The other thing is that we're starting to see more producers come into the program. Of the 2,400-ish people who participated in the program last year, 700 of them were new. 300 new, we had 300 new producers enrolled by December of last year for this current fiscal year. So I really think we're headed in the right direction here. If you look at kind of the broader results that they did, and the smallest, it's been about 40 years. Some of that has to do with the weather and the dry summer that we had. But I do think you're really starting to see, at least in the model, and that's sort of what we teach to, right? That's what we have to rely on, some significant reductions. Just some things that I'll flag, I think, as we look ahead that are sort of challenges on the horizon. One is trying to absorb that significant increase and the districts have done a really good job getting the money out the door. They've done a good job doing it in a smart way, but that's a heck of a ramp, right? Going from 20, 30 million bucks a year. I think I almost give people heart attacks whenever I announce the numbers, to going from $100 million plus a year. They've got to find staff. They got to get up to speed. When they hire somebody to go out and talk to the farmer, you can't just roll up into these communities not knowing anybody and say, hey, have I got a program for you? It takes some time to develop these relationships. We're also, again, this is also a grassroots effort. you have to go there and talk to people about doing this. And so we've kind of gotten the early adopters more or less. And so now we're starting to get into the people that were maybe a little bit skeptical at first. There was also, I think, back in the days where there wasn't enough money for everybody, a tendency for producers to sort of hold it close, right? If I tell you about it, you might get it and I'm not get it. Now there's plenty of money. We don't need that. So I think we're trying to sort of overcome some of that hurdle. I think the other thing that I wanted to flag, and there were some questions about sort of unaccounted practices in the model. Right? And that exists here too. There's a couple of things. One is I mentioned that structural practices have a lifespan in the model, whether it's 10 or 15 years or whatever for a fence or for a manure storage shed. The fence doesn't collapse, the manure storage shed doesn't vanish when the model stops accounting for it. It's still there, it's still producing environmental benefits, but unless we're able to recapture that information and get it into the model, we're not getting credit for it. We're also not getting credit for practices that don't go through, basically through us or through NRCS. So if you're just doing this under your own steam, we may not be capturing it. So those, as we look ahead, as we engage this new stakeholder group, that's one of the things that we're going to be focusing on is how do we capture either practices that have expired in the model and still there, or practices that were never really in the first place. And with that, I am happy to take any questions. I'm not going to pick between the two.
On that last point, when you develop around in Stafford and anywhere in Virginia, sometimes you have to buy nutrient credits that mitigate for your impervious surfaces, even though you have best practices on stormwater management, part of that. I'm curious, these people who are reclaiming farmlands downstream and downriver, are they receiving assistance from the state? Are we making any money off those transactions? Was that completely, and is that one of your unaccounted for improvements? Is it an improvement rate of a net zero gain?
Are you talking about like restoring like that? If you turn that parking lot back into a farm?
I've never actually seen what it looks like when they do it. I've seen it up in, actually in Culpeper. I think they created wetlands out of farm land. But down, I know that I've personally have bought nutrient credits, expensive ones, somewhere way down in our particular watershed, which changes just a little to the south. For someone who apparently, I don't know how I'm not exactly sure how they created the credits that I've paid a fortune for. But I'd like to know, I'm curious if that is completely private transaction, just governed by law, or is that something you have
So, and I don't mean to throw the EQ under the bus, but we, so DCR used to have stormwater many years ago. We shed that to our friends down the way. But James, I don't know if you've got any comments, but Kevin, you might be able to.
It's definitely nitrogen and phosphorus credits that you're buying. I know that.
It is, and it kind of operates in a slightly different world from a lot of what Matt and I are talking about today. So the nutrient credit trading program is housed at DEQ now. The Chesapeake Bay program that I oversee used to be at DCR. It all kind of got moved over under one roof at DEQ. What you're speaking to is basically offsetting impacts in one place.
So zero gain.
So it's a net zero, rather than just new development that creates more runoff and more nutrient loadings. You're doing something positive somewhere else to offset that, which we do track and keep a record of. But when we're talking about loadings into the bay model, we're really only looking at net improvement.
Right, and that was my question you answered. I was wondering if there was a net improvement given the way it's.
I do want to just kind of hop on that too, because I think Kevin mentioned celebrating the progress that we have made. And I think it's also important to, really realize that we have made that progress in the face of really significant growth, right? Population in the Commonwealth of developed areas. And so to be able to actually have reductions, even as we're seeing this other development, I think really is. And I don't know what the Senator.
Adrienne, do you have a question?
Oh, sorry, I was just reviewing what I think was the Bay backstop bills that was at Weber and Hanger.
Yes.
Yeah, last year on it. Is that, please forgive me, because there's a lot to digest on that.
It's a lot to digest, yeah.
And I just cannot be subject matter experts on everything come across us, but are some of these regular triggers, are those trying metrics from the federal level or just what we
TBD. So one of the things that the group, the ag, we call the ag SAG, is charged with is making recommendations on what those metrics should look like. We're in fact, we're having a meeting tomorrow to really start to crystallize that conversation. So we had a preliminary report that was released at the end of last year that more or less identified a lot of data gaps, right? I talked about, kind of practices and how there's a lot of stuff we can do with satellite imagery now for cover crops and all that sort of stuff. There's the first report of the group is due July 1st, and that I think is when you'll start to see some more of those measures. But if you have thoughts, I think there are legislative members of that group, aren't there? I don't know if they don't.
There's supposed to be one senator and one delegate, both of which are members of the Chesapeake Bay Commission, and as I said earlier, we're still awaiting those appointments. So
They're making calls, I'm sure, right? Yeah.
But I do think, generally, and the folks who have worked with me in past know this, I favor a collaborative effort with more feedback rather than less, so folks have thoughts on where we should be looking.
One more question, sorry, sir. The amount of money that's coming from the state level is really significantly jumped up, and it sounds to me like there's bipartisan thrust behind that, so knowing where we are with the budget right now, do you foresee any concerns that that's gonna change significantly from what's been kind of historically trending the last couple of years?
I learned a long time ago not to try to predict future bienniums. I would say for this biennium, I feel like we're in a good posture, right? The funding for the program is kind of carried through all iterations of it. We have funding for the program in 25. So that's good to provide some surety. One thing, kind of one nuance to this is that the funding for our friends in the district does have to be renewed every time the admin and ops funding. So there is some left that needs to be done for 25, but generally speaking, for the next program year, we're in good shape. Provided the budget goes through the way it is now for 26, we're in good shape. Really, then you got to get through 27. If you pull back in, back up. I know it's really hard for you all to see this, but if you get.
Use my camera.
And so. Oh, there you go. Here, so for 27, you've got another pretty big number here, $210 million, which is the kind of the total of everything.
Yeah.
That's what you could. And then it levels off quite a bit. Once again, theoretically, if you've gotten all of the structural practices done and you fund the annual practices, the need becomes relatively low. I mean, you're still talking $8 but it becomes less.
I'm just thinking about the point that you made about going into the communities and trying to establish the trust with those stakeholders on, there is something that consistency, I think, is probably pretty important to be able to get this across.
It is, it's very important, and it really is, I keep pointing to you, you're going to keep using the family. But for our districts to be able to hire people, one, I mentioned it takes a while to spend on, but two, it's real hard to hire somebody like, you may have a job next year, you may not have a job next year, and kind of see how it goes.
Which is the way it was for a long time.
Yeah, for consistency of funding for the program, for the district, and we really have, I think, made a significant effort to work with the districts, and they've got an association to make sure that we are doing right by them, because they're in a lot of ways to do something. But the consistent levels of funding, I think, are very important. But yes.
Okay, sorry.
That's right. I'm all for consistent funding. But, no, the one thing I did want to mention is you all may not know, we was talking about these lifespan practices. Some of these are 7, 10, 15 years, depending upon what the engineering practices are. DCR do have a program where we can go out there and recertify those practices when it comes to in the lifespan. That just like you said, just because it's in 7 years doesn't mean the practice is no longer any good.
Yeah.
So it disappears from the model after 7 years. We have recertified that is still in existence, is still maintained. And we have a lot of cooperation from the producers that allow us to come out there and do that. Of course, there's a monetary incentive. It's not that great, but it's still enough that they're willing to
step up to the plate and continue these practices.
It's better than a hammer coming down, you gotta do it, and we're not gonna
Yeah,
help you at all. But
And most of them are more than willing. We don't have too much of a problem. There's some people that, you know, just anti-government, what can I say?
I understand.
But it's it's more of, it's cost share. And there's a lot of decisions that go into this. Am I going to still be in farming? You know, do I have family going to take over for this? And, you know, 5 years from now, I'm going to retire. Or simply a matter that sometimes if the income from the farm is not that great, you still have to pay your share.
Yeah.
So, and a lot of times it's a little bit of a delay simply because we do have carryover. When we're doing heavy stream fencing, there just wasn't enough fencers to get the job done. And we had to carry it over to the following year. The practice hasn't been finished because they can't get anybody to come out there and put the fence up on them. So there's a lot that goes into it. It's not just, here's your fence up, here's your money.
Yeah, the will is there, but.
Yeah, there's a lot that goes into it. And it requires staff to go out and monitor this continuously until the job practice is done. And I'm the treasurer and I sign the check.
And this is a, you know, I've tried to kind of give you the flavor for it, but you are right. It is a tremendously complicated program and the implementation, the execution of it. Yeah, the manual is, I mean, it's literally.
And the paperwork, sometimes that thing.
Yeah, and then, you know, that's a barrier too, and that's something that we're cognizant of, is trying to reduce sort of the administrative barriers to the program.
Has there been any real discussion about identifying, is there areas that are duplicative in that paperwork to reduce it or just unnecessary?
So we,
Any real conversations with that?
So we've got there's another technical advisory committee, we've got a lot of those. So there's a technical advisory committee that the Soil and Water Board has that pulls in folks to talk about sort of the implementation of the program. So we tune it up every year. I think we get, you know, we get a lot of suggestions and we act on them, and we don't, but I think we're always open to looking at things every year and trying to make sure we're striking that balance between getting enough information that if we can have confidence the Commonwealth's money is being properly used versus overworking a producer. One thing that I think is that we've started to get into, and I think has probably a lot of promises, direct pay to contractors that are putting this in. So versus paying the producer and having them pay the contractor, there's some programs of direct pay that simplifies things. Both, I think, tremendously worked with, this isn't the cost share program, there's also a tax credit for ag BMP equipment and conservation tillage, for ag BMPs and conservation tillage equipment that you'll actually extend the sunset on this year, so thanks for that. But we worked with taxation on sort of the application period for that, because they were not taking them on a rolling basis, and it was really starting to show some stuff. So we are constantly trying to smooth the pathway.
I mean, if that's something that's under the review of the technical committee, that they can take a look at it. I've done that before, and I know this is not the sexiest part of doing, work in the General Assembly, to say we're gonna, it's probably one of my more favorite things I've ever done. It's from a work group that I did on behavioral health, as they said, it's very cumbersome for providers, and we scratched out some areas of the code, so I like to subtract, sometimes add.
We always, kind of complicates things a little bit, but we always want to make this as easy on the producer as possible.
Yeah.
As paperwork, easy on them as possible.
Yeah.
We'll do the computer work if you just say, yes, you like to do this practice to help out water quality or whatever. Soil erosion, yeah, but we like to keep it that way, though we would appreciate if we didn't have to sign some more pieces of paper. We got 3 pieces of paper, that have to be signed, as well as all the receipts and everything, because we have to justify, we gotta make sure that this money is being spent the way it's supposed to be spent. And, we have a estimated cost share, what we will pay. It doesn't mean that they have to do it that way, but if it costs any more, we will pay up to our cost share. And over and above that, depending upon what it is, he could get a tax credit, or he could just, but fencing, we go with the central wire fence. If they want to put a wood fence, we don't mind a bit. Put up your wood fence. We're only going to pay you for potential wire. The rest of this is your decision. So we try to work with them however we can get them to get the job done.
Yeah, James, did I miss anything on the deck, or kind of what we try to do to smooth the process from our end? He's going.
I'm a fine girl. The council.
All right, James, if you're talking, you can't do your, anyway, I will say.
How about now? Can you hear me now?
More storage and more cattle shed,
He's
it's
on.
not sexy cool. James, you wanna go ahead?
Yeah, just one thing I would add is, well, really two things. One, when you think about and remember that this tremendous program is a cost share program, and we're talking about implementing at $100 million per year. Remember, that means the producers across Virginia are contributing their share, maybe $25 million of investment into these conservation practices. So it is a significant program, and it is a significant investment from producers. The other point is that when a producer receives cost share, that is taxable income for those producers. Even though they're doing it to implement a conservation practice for public benefit, they bear the tax burden of that investment. So soil and water districts have to issue tax documents to each of those producers that participate, and those producers have to pay state and federal taxes on that as though it was earned income. So it's as the program gets larger and larger, we're going to run into challenges with the agricultural economy and how much funding, how much money producers have to put into play. And if we could ease their burden on either side of that equation, cash up front or tax burden on the back end, I think it could help us implement more.
Good points, James, thank you.
Woody, you want to finish up?
Oh, yeah, Mr. Rice, sorry.
There's a lot of knowledge in this room on this, but every once in a while, we ought to back up and say where we get come from and where we are now. And I remember when soil and water, we were working on a 50-foot buffer on our border rail. And then I looked at the money side, and we got enough money to pay for the seed, put it in, but my tractor drill and my time was on me, and that's fine. But the greatest step we made forward in recent years, and I want to thank our political people in this region for this, is cover crop program. Because we have rains that are different than when I was a young fellow. When I was young, we had a ½ inch rain every week. And now we have 3-inch rains and don't have rain for a month. So our runoff is great. And I look at the sandy soil. I'm in Westmoreland County, it leads down on the Rappahannock. And if we didn't have cover crop programs now, and we didn't have, if you let the soil lay bare in the wintertime, I would hate to know what our nutrient runoff would be. Now, I figure my cover crop money is enough to pay for the seed and pay for me putting it out there. But it's still my time and my equipment wearing out, putting it out there. Can't be, there's not enough money to pay for that. Where I gain at, to put it simply for all of us in this room, is I'm holding nutrients. That means not only the ones God gave me, but the nutrients I put out there in a fertilizer bag, which didn't get used by that crop that year. So I gain by conserving my nutrients. So if we were to sit in this room and say, what new program will help us? I hate to tell you, that 50-foot buffer that went to 100 and cover crop, probably coastal plain soil that is sandy. Every inch of it probably needs to be cover crop if it's not in a crop. And I think we have spent our money more wise with cover crops than anything else. And I think we ought to take note of it.
I'm gonna stop
With
there.
that, we're-
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your presentation today. We had a few members come in before we started, so we'll give them an opportunity to introduce themselves. Cole.
Josh Cole, representing the 65th district here in Stafford County, the city of Fredericksburg and Spotsylvania.
Hi, Gary Higgins. I represent the 30th district. It's Western Loudoun County and Western Fauquier County.
Senator.
Sorry.
Yourself.
Oh, so sorry. Mine is still going with this. Tara Duran, I represent the 27th district. So that is most of the county of Stafford, all of the city of Fredericksburg, and portions of Spotsylvania County.
Deontay Diggs, I represent the George Washington District here in Stafford County.
Dr. Pamela Young, Stafford County Board of Supervisors, and sorry that some of us in Stafford were late. We had a commitment earlier today. With Congresswoman Abigail's family.
95 wasn't the contribution either. With that, we'll move on to General Assembly legislative members' comments. Anything that y'all would like to add that happened this session that was maybe important to things we do here in the commission, or just things that y'all think everybody should know about? I'll leave it up to you all to decide who goes first.
There was a lot of stuff that passed. I don't think it's worth talking about until you see if the governor's gonna pass it. I broke ranks a little bit and voted for some tree canopy things, raised some eyebrows, but maybe that'll make a difference. I don't know. But I want to welcome you to my district. I think we should make a motion that we always have our meetings right here. 2 minutes away from my office.
We'll be back here in about 5 minutes.
A lot of work for me to make it to the next meeting here. Okay, I have no comment.
Well, this is an airport, so you can fly out to the next meeting.
And Paul has a plane.
I don't have a plane.
Not yet.
Yeah.
If no one else does, I know Senator Stewart's not here. He and I had partnered on a piece of legislation in my first year, Fredericksburg, but he had something for DEQ to authorizing them to use to utilize and incorporate comprehensive groundwater, surface water, and aquifer data in decision-making process related to the issuance and renewal of groundwater withdrawal permits and surface water withdrawal permits, such may include information relating to water levels, flow rates, and water quality, which is something that we discussed here in this group. And so I just wanted to bring that to the body here today, say, hey, look, that was done. I didn't partner with him. I didn't carry the House version. Maybe if I had carried a House version, I could have gotten something through this year, but I didn't. So make sure I look for opportunities like that going forward.
Any other comments from members of General Assembly?
Go ahead.
Going back to this meeting, I appreciate the opportunity to be here, work with you all on these issues, and look forward to working with my friends here in the General Assembly to move things forward. I want to apologize for being a half hour late. I was on the phone in the car. I didn't make the adjustments in the traffic on 95 because I didn't want to risk my life to try and figure out how to make the mic work. But I do want to thank you all for not making me chairman or vice chairman. Happens. Find that out and get this. Thank you.
If I had known you're on your way, I would have made the motion.
Did you want to make a comment?
No, I think, yeah, just this has been a very good discussion, and certainly it's going to follow up with some of my conversation offline on that one. Thank you this has been a good agenda.
Thank you all for the good session we all had, and got a lot accomplished. I'm sure it was a difficult one, as it all seems to be these days. With that, future meeting dates and locations?
Yes, and right there at the top, we need to consider moving our next meeting. As those of you who've been on the commission a while know that we plan our meetings about 18 months out so that they're on the bottom of each agenda so that we can get that on their calendars. And probably 20 years ago, Woody probably remembers this, the commission members talked about we should have the commission meetings on days that aren't board of supervisor meetings. And the only day in the week at that time was Wednesday. So the commission decided to have their meetings on Wednesdays. Well, one of the beauties of Wednesdays over the last 20 years has been, we've never had a state holiday on a Wednesday. So when I was putting together the calendar 18 months ago and wrote this out, didn't even dawn on me that there might be a state holiday on a Wednesday. We have a state holiday Juneteenth. So staff is recommending that we move the meeting to the 26th. The site that we've been talking to about hosting the meeting in June is accommodating to that. But I can't make that decision. That's action of the commission.
Any problems with that?
No.
Now that I moved that we moved the June meeting from June 19th to June 26th.
That's the Longwood University, am I reading this right? Was that the Longwood?
Yes,
Yeah.
that is correct.
June,
Blau Center.
June what?
It'll be moved from June 19th to June 26th, same time, 1 p.m.
It's highlighted.
Yeah, just,
Oh, it's right in front of me, sorry.
Same location?
they look at it.
The motion's been made and properly second. All those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Thank you.
Thank you. That allows us to stick with our Wednesdays, 1 p.m., which was a collective decision of the commission years ago. It was the best time and day of the week.
I thought you were gonna say that some boards of supervisors decided to meet on Wednesday.
I wasn't gonna wait either. If that becomes a problem in the future, we'll go back through we went through a voting process several years back to come to the day of the week and the time of day.
Less balance than the last week.
We don't talk about federal business. I want to commend that site to everybody. I visited it last week. It is a beautiful location. Now, it's in the Potomac Basin, but it's real close to the Rappahannock, as our host will tell you. What the plans that Longwood College has for that facility as an environmental education facility and retreat is pretty impressive. And they have living shorelines on the property that if we don't have weather like this, we will hopefully be able to get out and see. Those of you who've been on the commission for a while know that 3 out of 4 times that we plan an outdoor affair, we get weather like this. But we're gonna cross our fingers for June 26th. We'll have fixed it because we moved the date. So I see a living shoreline discussion at that meeting. And I want to talk about other future discussions, but the other meetings, no changes. Following our routine, the spring meeting is held in the Middle Basin, of which there are 5 jurisdictions, and we move around the 5. The summer meeting, the June meeting, is held in the Lower Basin, of which there are 5 counties, and we move around the 5. Now you get the idea why I say we'll be back here in 5 minutes. The September meeting is held in the Upper Basin, of which there are 5 counties, and we move around the 5. We'll be in Rappahannock County, and I'll be working with Debbie Donahue, who is on the line virtually for a location. And then our December meeting, we hold at Meadow Event Park each year, and I won't force Woody to make everybody listen to me tell the story of why we meet at Meadow Event Park, but you can ask Woody. Then we'll be in Caroline County a year from now. With that, Mr. Chairman, I'm ready to talk about some agenda items and then get us out of here.
All right, future agenda, let's carry on.
As you said, as I mentioned, we'll be at Longwood University's Blau Center. If all goes well, the chairman of their real estate foundation, John Daniels, former Secretary of Natural Resources, in fact, was the first Secretary of Natural Resources in Virginia under Governor Bliles, is hoping to be with us to talk a little bit about their vision for the center. The technical committee met last week to have a discussion about what are some of the burning issues that this commission may want to consider on future agendas. The growth of living shorelines and some of the issues, the economic development issues going along with them that you and I have communicated about, it was one of those. But also, and you heard it mentioned today, septic and the problems that we've got to deal with septic going forward. And that might be good for an upper basin discussion because your stormwater district up there has for years had a kind of a statewide landmark program. And it might be time to hear from your folks again. And so maybe for the September meeting. The Department of Forestry, we've got Sentinel Landscape Program, Healthy Watershed Forest, which you saw mentioned in the Chesapeake Bay Commission presentation, tree canopy, and Terry Lasher probably has some other things that we need to be talking about because tree canopy and forestry work is so important on the water quality side. The HB 206 study, what is that? That's legislation from 2022 that called for DEQ to implement some mitigation measures for major solar projects and pull together that ad hoc advisory group to recommend how to do that. That report is not done yet, but when it comes out, it's expected to be pretty consequential. And so technical committee talked last week about once that report comes out, we're gonna all need to come to understand that and what that means. Other topics was whole nutrient credit program that you heard mentioned just a little while ago. Water supply planning generally and water supply issues. One of the things that's already on the agenda for September, the SWIFT program, which is an innovative water treatment program in Hampton Roads Sanitation District. It's aimed at solving multiple issues. One, reducing nutrient discharge into the waters. Two, helping to restore the aquifer. Three, pushing back saltwater intrusion. And four, mitigating land subsidence. So if you can imagine one major capital project of Hampton Roads Sanitation District aimed at four target solutions to problems. It's a pretty groundbreaking project that they've been keeping this commission informed with over the years. And they've agreed to come join us in September. And then finally, continuing the work on solar. For those who were on the commission when the solar report that this commission asked for in December of 2022 was presented to the commission by the technical committee in June of 2023, the commission, after quite a discussion, voted to accept the report but call it a draft. And why? Because I think it was your words, there's so many emerging issues we're going to want to add to it. Well, some of those things are occurring. And the technical committee was talking last week about different chapters or addendums or something that we need to add. Best practices in comp plan development. And you had a presentation at the December meeting by the Berkeley group on that very topic. Well, that was a nice PowerPoint, but how do we turn it into text to make it part of the record? But also some things are developing and I'm gonna beg indulgence. I'm not trying to get controversial, but call it like it is. There was legislation this year in the General Assembly that was aimed at localities being the problem with additional solar. And we had a presentation from during the technical committee meeting last week from solar developer who basically told us, well, that may or may not be true, but the problem is the lack of capacity of the existing transmission grid to accept but so much more inputs over time. And if that is a real world thing, this is me talking, this is where I might get myself in trouble. Do we want to base a public policy decision that's based on one assumption when another reality is true? Yeah, that first assumption may be true or not, but okay, I'm sorry, I spoke over Pamela, please.
No, you're fine. Thank you. I just wanted to thank everybody first for coming all the way out here to Stafford. Hopefully we were a good host. I wanted to bring up a topic for conversation that we had, was it a year or two ago? the data center, we talked about solar, but we also talked about the data center and the impact on the environment and the water. And I don't think, we talked about having a subcommittee or looking into it a little bit more, working with, asking DEQ for some more information. Where did that go? And where's Richard? Where's my senator?
Oh,
He's still there.
Well, that was the piece of
That's my
legislation,
Huh?
that was the piece of legislation I gave an update on that he submitted and is going before the governor for.
Oh, you did?
Yes, the Senator Stewart submitted legislation this past session to address that issue.
Okay, I think I read up
Yeah.
on that one,
Yeah.
okay. So is somebody gonna bring back some information out?
I'm sure that he will once
Okay,
it's
perfect.
signed into law. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. All right.
And
Any other topics of important discussion or others you want to?
I just was gonna say, data centers was, where the conversation last week concluded. And part of the reason we didn't proceed with really digging into data centers is because we were at the time this discussion came up, we were in the middle of that solar study, and we only have so much bandwidth here,
Gotcha.
to do that sort of thing. It's an emerging issue, without a doubt.
Yeah.
Ellie, on the solar question, I assume you're referring to SB 697 that was, or there might have been a few of
There
them.
were three bills.
Okay.
697 was one of them.
And do you anticipate that coming back next year?
The patrons of the three bills have indicated that they want to bring legislation back in the future because they're worried that we're not gonna meet the goals laid out in the Virginia Clean Economy Act, and that localities are the problem, or part of the problem. And the point of the discussion last week was, well, that may be true, but there are certainly other problems, and one is a major infrastructure problem.
Yeah.
And if a locality's approved projects, but they can't be built because you gotta upgrade the backbone of the infrastructure, why take away the authority of localities to hold public hearings and give it to the State Corporation Commission?
And Bill, I believe it's, I might have the acronym wrong, but I believe it's PJM that.
PJM, yes.
That approves these. I will ask them, what the capacity is.
And that information we were told is available. Those data sets are available by county, from PJM. So that is on the list of things for us. I didn't want to go too far into the weeds. Okay. Woody had a question.
Just slightly, I want to bring it up. I want to go along with what Pamela said about the water going over the Rappahannock River for these centers. The second thing why we need to really worry about solar is I know my county seems to be every 6 months we're putting in another solar farm, and nobody is addressing 30 years from now in the taxation and who's gonna clean it up. Because I hate to say it, I'll be gone.
No.
But where does the tax base for the county come on this property, and who's gonna clean it up and dispose of it? And nobody says anything about it, and no system lasts forever. And what I'm saying, our progress is so fast that I don't believe windmills and solar farms are gonna exist 30 years from now. We will be doing it a cheaper, better way. So we all need to think smarter. And the one thing I wanted to ask everybody, and I'll have to ask all of your all's forgiveness on this one. Because I'm from Westmoreland County, I have the Rappahannock River on my south side, and I have the Potomac River on my north side. And before anybody gives up on me, I want somebody to come to me and give me information where I go for help. And I honestly had a subdivision, the oldest in the county, come to me and say, Woody, we need help in maintaining our seawall, our boat ramps, our docks. And we know that goes on all over the state. But when people are saying, all of us in this room know it would take a year or two to create a sanitary district, which we have done for 2 subdivisions in our county. But we need, if people are willing to say, we just want help and we're willing to help and we're willing to work There ought to be somebody who can go to subdivisions and they ought to give them guidance on how to take care of their waterfront property. That's all.
Harrison Carmen has his hand raised to speak.
Online.
Awesome, yes, hi, hello. Just to talk a little, just to further expand upon some of the talks we were just saying with solar, I just feel like that kind of understates the need to kind of like shift that focus from a purely utility scale perspective to at least a balanced perspective of both utility scale and like distributed private scale, especially when you have in either towns or government centers or in cities, a bunch of gray space that's already contributing to water runoff, that putting solar on those aspects and trying to find ways the state could help with that, you know, would have a net zero change on water quality while also being able to address some of these power concerns without needing huge transmissions, just as an idea of something that we might want, that might need to be explored with in the future. I know there was one Senate bill, number 234, for like solar parking lot development. That kind of stuff could be something that could help address that issue with, you know, the transmission line capacity issues, as well as developing, you know, green land that, you know, could end up increasing runoff into the Rappahannock River Basin.
Thank you. Any other comments for future meetings? Seeing none, with that, we've run over time. I'll call for, I will adjourn this meeting.
Let's get Matt. I just like.
So, yeah.